Hi guys, I'm going to try this again this week and do another video. It seemed to go really well last week, so just wanted to see how it plays out this time. I'm looking at a question this week that I think will really hit home to a lot of people. It's something I think just absolutely plagues humanity and always has. And the question is, am I good enough? Am I good enough to do whatever? Fill in the blank here. How do I measure up? How do I compare to other people? How do I even know? I think it's a question that's been there since the fall of man. We look at Adam and Eve, created for perfect fellowship with God, and then something happens. We have the fall. They're cut off from God, spiritually dead, no longer receiving that perfect love and validation from God. They were forced to look to outside sources for that. Namely, they looked to other people. And I think that's just the way things have always gone since. We have this new way of functioning that came into play. And it's basically looking to other people for your validation. A validation only meant to be met by God. And so we never measure up to that standard. So what do we do to those standards is we change them. We set a standard, we miss it, so we lower it a little bit. Maybe you hit that one day, so you raise it up a little more for the next day until you find your balance. And your balance will usually be the right place where you can look around and say, well, sure, that guy's great. Maybe I don't measure up to him, but I'm way better than those guys. No different than a tax collector in the temple with a Pharisee. And the Pharisee looks over and says, well, Lord, thank you that I'm not like him. I think the best example we have in Scripture of someone who did measure up in his own eyes is the Apostle Paul. And I've lost my place in my Bible, so forgive me for a second here, because this is the third time I've done this video tonight. In his own words, Paul lacked nothing. He says, though I myself have reason for confidence in the flesh, if anyone else thinks he has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church, as to righteousness under the law, blameless. So he had all these amazing attributes, and he was a guy, he could walk through Israel and just strut his stuff. Anywhere he went, there's a seat for him at the head of the table. He didn't have to worry if he measured up to anyone else. I'm sure he looked maybe to his leaders and was like, oh, here's something to strive to, but I don't think Paul lacked confidence in anything. And then he meets Jesus, and his whole life gets turned upside down. There's several places in scriptures where he talks about he has nothing to rely on himself. He gets to a place where he's out evangelizing people, spreading the word. And who knows when this was written, but I love reading his Romans 7 experience. He talks about his life as a believer and trying to fight the battle against sin in his own strength, and fails miserably. Everything good he wants to do, he can't do. Nothing good dwells in him. Gets to a place where he says, wretched man that I am. This does not sound at all like this man who was a Pharisee of Pharisees. But when we read the rest of his writings, we realize we meet a really different man in Paul's writings. He's humble and doesn't really brag, doesn't talk about any of the stuff that went on before, other than maybe to give his credentials for his past life. And what does it take for him to go from where he was to where he got to? And then the easiest answer for me is he went through a time of suffering. And he really lays it out well in 2 Corinthians 1. They went to this mission trip to Asia. Now at this point, the Spirit had never let them into Asia. They were turned away when they tried to go before. But now he's going back and he's armed. He's been blessed by the other apostles, sent out. He must have been just thinking, this is going to be amazing, this trip. And so what does he say about it? We do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the afflictions we experienced in Asia. We were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death. But that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will deliver us again. Paul went through this time of intense suffering to a point where he basically lays out, I wanted to die. We couldn't do this. He even gives a reason, though, God allowed that to happen so they would learn to trust in him. That their strength was nothing in the grand scheme of things, but God's strength was everything. He learned he was sufficient to do nothing in his own power. When the questions came in Corinth about his credentials and why he was able to be an apostle, and he starts out in 2 Corinthians 3, he says, are we beginning to commend ourselves again? Or do we need, as some do, letters of recommendation to you? You yourselves are our letter of recommendation, written on our hearts, to be known and read by all. And you show that you are a letter from Christ, delivered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. I love those verses because I feel like he's just speaking to all of us here. But you know, you are a letter from God. He said, God has done something, and he uses you to pour this out into the world. But how could I ever possibly do that? That's there's that question again, am I good enough? How would we be possibly sufficient to deliver it? He goes on in verse 4, such is the confidence that we have through Christ toward God. Now that we are sufficient, not that we are sufficient in ourselves to claim anything as coming from us, but our sufficiency is from God, who has made us sufficient to be ministers of a new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. I always love that last little bit. The man who wrote half of our New Testament says the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Paul knew something that we all need to come to know, that our words will never impart life. I could sit here and talk all night. I can't bring life to you. But it's the Spirit of the living God that flows through me, through you, through all believers. That's what reaches out to another. It ignites something in them. It brings life. That doesn't mean we sit and do nothing. What it means is that we can step confidently into any situation, knowing that Christ is our sufficiency, and he will supply what's needed. This works for us in ministry situations we talk about a lot, but it works for us in all life situations. I talked a bit last week about the struggle I had going to work. For myself, nothing had changed on the surface level. If anything, things were worse. Anyone who knew me during that time, I went through a very, very rough period. And the thought of going back to work was terrifying. But the discovery of Christ as my sufficiency in all situations allowed me to just step out with confidence in so many different places that I was struggling with before. I think that makes all the difference. Now, to come to that, though, it's not, I didn't just wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm just going to let Jesus do this. I had to go through some intense suffering. Paul talks, he went to go through a period of intense suffering. I think we all need to be brought to a place, and it may look different for everybody, but we go to a place where we learn that we can do nothing. His power is made perfect in our weakness. I always kind of joke about that. I say, well, his power must be pretty perfect in me these days, because I don't feel like I have a lot sometimes. So when I go back to the original question tonight, it's, am I good enough? No, absolutely not. But I have the great I am that goes with me. In fact, he goes before me. He is my sufficiency in any and every situation, not just the ones where we think we need him. That's an important key I find too, is that even I find still myself maybe not turning to prayer in different situations and looking at things and you know, sometimes it takes a little gentle reminder, or not so gentle, depending on the situation, that no, you don't got this. If anyone should have had confidence in their abilities, it was Paul. God allowed him to fail, because if he had succeeded in his own strength, there would have been no life in it. The letter, or the words, the works, the law, only brings death. Life only flows from the Spirit of the living God. Paul came to know it. So many through the ages have come to know it. I'm coming to know it would be a better term than saying I know it. And my prayer for everybody is that they would go through something. Please, not anything like what I went through would be my prayer, but something where you just know that your strength will not handle this situation, and you will turn to him and just, you'll learn that, wow, he's more than enough in any of these situations. And my question for this week is, I would just love if anyone, you know, in the comment section, just drop us a comment. Tell me a situation where you didn't feel like you could handle it, and God just stepped out and showed you he was your sufficiency in those situations. If you don't want to do anything too personal, I understand that, but I'd love to just, you know, hear some hear some kind of testimony from people this week and just hear how we've all come to know Christ as our very life itself. Have a great week, guys, and we'll be back next week.